Are we barreling towards World War III because the United States has seized 3 oil tankers off of the coast of Venezuela, and at least one of the tankers was reportedly headed for China? And this is the part most people are missing. The US targeting Venezuelan oil isn't really about Venezuela, it's about containing China. Today, Venezuela doesn't sell most of its oil to the US or to Europe, it sells it to Asia, especially China. That oil is cheap, it's heavy crude that Chinese refineries can process easily, and it helps China reduce its dependence on Middle Eastern supply routes that are heavily monitored and controlled by the US Navy. So when the US seizes Venezuelan tankers, it's not just hurting Venezuela, it's making oil shipments to China riskier, which in turn raises shipping and insurance costs, and it forces China to either overpay for oil elsewhere or dip into its strategic reserves, neither of which China wants to do, of course. And this is indirect pressure by the United States. Instead of sanctioning China directly and triggering an immediate retaliation, the US instead squeezes the countries that supply it. On paper, Washington can say, we're not going after China, we're going after Venezuela. But the impact is felt in Beijing. So the same logic applies to US pressure on Iran as well. For example, the most recent oil tanker the US seized off of the coast of Venezuela came from a port in Iran. And according to US authorities, the tanker was part of Iran's so-called shadow fleet. And this is bad news for China, since 90% of Iran's oil ends up going to China, often at a steep discount, because Iran struggles to find other buyers of their oil due to US sanctions. And if you can disrupt this cheap oil supply to China, you can put real strain on China's economy. And here's the key difference. Iran has a relatively formidable military, just ask Israel, which makes direct confrontation far riskier. Venezuela, on the other hand, is far weaker, which makes it the perfect testing ground for the US. It's already sanctioned, politically isolated, militarily weak, and outside NATO protection, which is exactly why it becomes the ideal place to test whether Chinese energy supplies can be disrupted without triggering major fallout. But China isn't just going to sit back and absorb the pressure quietly. Beijing has options. One possibility is that China allows the US to overextend itself against Venezuela, turning it into a proxy conflict. In that scenario, China could support Venezuela indirectly through financing, intelligence, equipment, or weapons, much like the US fought Russia by arming Ukraine without fighting directly. And at that point, Venezuela becomes less about oil for China and more about strategy, draining US attention, resources, and credibility, while China avoids a direct confrontation and lets Washington get tied down in yet another prolonged conflict.